So, what's inside the tablets and notebooks? Here's an example taken from one of the many that led to the completion of that long narrative poem I talked about earlier, My Brother Running. This is a beginning draft for one of the later sections of the poem, and what it shows is the reckless, no-holds-barred method I generally use to explore a poetic subject. I should tell you that My Brother Running was a hard poem for me to write because its subject was my younger brother John's compulsive jogging or running, which finally led to his fatal heart attack at age 43. And I was trying to determine in the poem what he thought he was running from and running to, sometimes 9 and 10 miles a day, in a period of great trouble for him. But I was also trying to link his running to the childhood conflict in our family that I began with in this presentation, and link it also to the accelerating pace of life in America and the politics of Ronald Reagan and the explosion of the Columbia shuttle, and even to the destructive power of American myths. In other words, I wanted to work on a larger canvas than I had used in the past, so I needed to write exploratory drafts, chapter by chapter, to figure out what approaches and associations might serve best. But then that's the way I always begin the writing of a poem, starting with a shopping list of possible details, images, events, approaches, anything that might come into my head as I think about a subject. This page actually contains a record of 3 different exploratory sessions. The first one in pencil to ask myself questions and run through a range of associations. The second on another day in green ink to pen in still other possibilities. And the third in black ink, completed later on with X's and circles over the whole page to get rid of what turned out to be false leads and find out where the true poem in motion was. The idea in these exploratory drafts is to keep things fluid and associative, or put it this way, never to let the left brain know what the right brain is doing. Do ideas occur to you when you're on the road in the car? Well, that's what checkbooks are for. I gathered up these checkbook pages and pasted them into the notebook after some trip I took, revisiting the pages I pasted later on, as you see with that black pen. Here's another draft page from the My Brother Running tablet, a mosaic of check marks, stars, notes circled, and notes added to notes. But on this page, which is for section or chapter 10 of the poem, I'm beginning to try out actual lines, as you see in the foreground of that field of material. In fact, that first line there at the top, foreground, is the first line of the chapter as I finally wrote it. But of course it was my job. The other lines you find under that one disappearing in later drafts. Perhaps you've noticed that my handwriting here and elsewhere is not, entirely legible? I have to admit that when I open my tablet on a new day of writing, I myself sometimes have trouble reading what I've written the day before. The most obvious reason my drafts are hard to read, I guess, is that I'm often writing quickly, following the feeling or idea of a poem in motion. But there's another reason for my illegibility that I've just lately figured out, and I admit it's weird. I want to keep the poem in progress in some way a secret, even from myself. That is, a mystery I have to dig for, or a secret code I have to discover each morning as I sit down to continue the process of making the poem. Once I got each section of My Brother Running the way I thought I wanted it, I finally did give the poem to the left brain, which is to say I typed it up, always what happens at the very end of the process for me. But as you see from the marginal questions and notes here, even the typed version has become a draft on the way to another typed version. By the way, that typed chapter you see at the very top of this slide, given its own title, is from an earlier version of My Brother Running, a version that was totally different and represented months of work, after which I tore it apart and started all over again. This poem about my brother, with all its stitching and unstitching, took me 5 years to write, and just for the record, my second long narrative titled Fire, which also appears in different versions in my archive, took 6 years, and the shorter poems I've written can take anywhere from several days to years of return bouts. So you see, writing for me is truly rewriting, as I have no doubt it is for all the other writers here. And whatever poem I write, long or short, I always begin with an exploratory draft involving a listing of random thoughts and possibilities, as here in this more recent family poem called Draw Me. I'm not going to linger over the details of this page because I only intend a summary of my writing process here as I wrap this up. So I click on to a later page of the manuscript in which I'm trying out both images and lines. There at the left, where you see that listing of phrases beginning with the word God, I'm already investigating possible endings for the poem, which concludes in its completed version with a sort of ironic prayer. So I'm writing the poem, so to speak, upside down. And every day I come back to my notebook, once the poem gets going, I invariably copy out the lines and stanzas from the day before, as here, to fall once again into the trance of the poem, testing out its language and its rhythms. The result of this process over the years has been the volumes I've squeezed into this slide and a couple of books without covers for the future, one at the top center to the left, a forthcoming volume of new and selected poems, the other left of center at the bottom, a forthcoming memoir, almost all of the books dedicated to my dear wife and best critic, Diane. Looking back on the writing I've done, I don't really think of it as some great literary enterprise, but instead as a long and earnest conversation with the reader that has come out of the life I have actually lived and has helped me to understand that life, including the difficult bonds of family and the struggles of the ordinary people who live around me, so many of them unsung, and the sometimes troubling mythology of my country. And in another key entirely, the mystery contained in the commonest things. We writers can make too much of our struggles, but the fact is that these books were not so easy to write, and they had their own cost. And I want to close with just a few words to the young writers here about the difficulties of this path you've chosen. As you've just heard, the difficulties in my own case have been those endless drafts of poems I mentioned, many of them ending in failure, and the years of longing for readers. Also, my responsibilities to family and to work, which sometimes threaten to shut my writing down entirely. What you don't learn in creative writing class is there's a lot of failure and heartbreak connected with being a writer, as any seasoned writer here could say. On the other hand, without failure, you'd have nothing to test your resolve to be a writer against. And without knowing heartbreak, you'd never get the chance to develop heartbreaking powers. So I wish you, my dear fellow writers, your own fair share of both in your future life. And while I'm at it, I want to wish you one more thing, and that is what the mother of all American poets, Emily Dickinson, called awe. It was one of her favorite words, A-W-E, a feeling that whatever your experience in the world may bring you, from gladness to sorrow, it is above all a source of wonder. Thank you all.